Yes, today is Hannu Lindbergh, currently kind of the maestro of construction technology at DPR. I think one of the fascinating things as I prep for this, and Hannu, I go back a little bit, but you have a fascinating resume. So let me just go through this real quick. You started in the field, you spent some time building products at Trimble. You then went to DPR, were kind of delivering VDC at a project level. You then kind of took your talents to Disney, worked on a few world-class projects, one of which you and I kind of met on briefly, and then have gone back to DPR, kind of orchestrating tech across a lot of different projects at an enterprise level. So, you've seen construction tech from a lot of different angles, hands on the field, building and developing software products, and now kind of steering high level strategy that ties it all together. So, Hani, welcome to Construction Conversations.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Stephen and Lars. Appreciate it.
So, if you were to look back, like, was this the career path that you kind of mapped out for yourself as a youngin? There, looking at what your life would look like.
Yeah, I don't know if it was exactly mapped out. I don't think any of us, some of us have a really good plan. I don't think I've ever had a chance to really follow an exact path. It's been really more about following my gut and my passion, right? And that started with construction.
Yeah.
And it's why, like, after going to school, I remember my first interview with Nordic Construction Company. They really just asked me, like, why do you want to go to the field? Like, everybody that comes and starts this in the construction industry wants to be in the cushy office, right? And I was like, you know what? I want to learn how to build. So
Mhm.
I said, I want to go out there in the field and really like work with the teams in the field and superintendents and learn how, some of this theory that we learned in school actually goes into practice. And there's nothing like learning through a series of mistakes in the field at, in the fire, so to speak. I just naturally was drawn to it. And I think what really got me the technology bug was early on, even back in like early thousands, obviously AutoCAD and things like ArchiCAD were prominent, and then they were just starting to get some of these scheduling platforms on, like Dynaproject, which actually ended up being Vico. The flow line, line of balance scheduling became sort of these sort of day-to-day tools that were available to us in construction, at least in Finland. It's where a lot of this stuff is actually developed. So it's kind of I kind of got into it. I started using it in my day-to-day job, and I was like, you know what? There's something here. This is helping me make my job easier and helping me find errors in drawings and 2D drawings at the time and pull dimensions that were maybe not available. So it allowed me to not have to ask a bunch of RFIs to get the job done. And I think that's what really kind of got me into it. And then jumping into the software side and moving back from the States into US. I mean, that was really like in the early days of the BIM boom, right? And I had the luxury of really, I think, seeing and firsthand how a lot of general contractors in the US were at the time implementing building information modeling. And those were kind of really still in the early days of construction technology, but primarily BIM was the driver at the time. That was really going to be this sort of next thing since best thing since sliced bread. A little bit of the same sort of excitement that we see around AI at that time was really around revolving around BIM, and we thought it was going to solve all of our problems.
Well, and we'll dig into a bit of maybe the current state of that promise. But when you moved to Trimble, so you were you got exposed to how maybe tech can make your life better from a field perspective. Is that what drove you into the product side of Trimble to try and influence the development side?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, there was a cool opportunity that opened up, and I was, after 3 or 4 years in the field, I was like, all right, I think their future is really in this technology and where we're headed. And I think I kind of said, okay, there was an opportunity to join the team at the time. They were working on a construction management module within Tekla Structures, and I was like, hey, I'm all ready, I'm game, let's go. And I was like, let's develop something that works for the field and is helpful and useful for us from beyond just clash detection, really looking at it from
Mhm.
a planning perspective. And I think that is still kind of one of the fundamental opportunities that still exist, that is using it as a planning tool, whether it's for site logistics or visual planning or takeoff or just querying information, just understanding what's in your project without having to flip through pages and pages and pages of documentation. Obviously, that's still needed, but I think there was just a cool opportunity there, I saw kind of what was happening there with that sort of connection to the field, and that's really what got me excited about the opportunity, especially when Trimble came along. We really started working on this BIM to field workflows. If you recall those early days, we were actually working with a couple of folks working on developing a plugin that would allow us to extract points in the total stations. So when we were working on that in the kind of a back office, or initially it was a hack, and then it became part of the product, and it was really what allowed us to really more seamlessly connect model information to the field and make it really more real for people beyond just looking at, design models, but you had real construction models with real like anchor bolts and footings, and so we were able to really, I think, streamline that workflow, and I think it just created another value proposition, I think, for the people to say, hey, there's something here, and making sure that information that we coordinated actually gets out there to the field and gets built accurately and correctly based on what actually got modeled.
Hmm. Well, and it's interesting that even many years later, that's still a challenge to be solved for
I
from
know,
a
man.
process or a tech standpoint. But
Oh, yeah, tell me about it.
so, given maybe that tour from field ops to product and even on the owner side, one of the things we wanted to dig into was you've seen a variety of different flavors of management styles, right? And so now in a leadership position at DPR, DPR has a title-free kind of organizational structure, which I find fascinating. So what led DPR to lean into that kind of setup? And then maybe what surprises folks when they first encounter that?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it had to do initially just looking back on the history of Doug, Peter, and Ron, and the reason why they left, Rudolph and Sutton at the time, and why they wanted to find their own company, and some of it was about some of that freedom and getting rid of the bureaucracy and the red tape, and you know, I think letting people be the problem solvers, and it's not always the guy with the highest rank in the room. How do you do continuous improvement and continue to, advance the best practices of a company if you've got some manual that hasn't been changed in 100 years, right? And so I think that has a lot to do with it. I think just that inherently in the DNA of DPR, the ever forward mentality, I think is a huge one. And just the enjoyment and the culture around like, hey, this is not, I mean, it's really more about roles and responsibilities. Don't get me wrong, there are still people who have very specific roles and responsibilities at DPR, but there isn't some, magic red line says that you can't go do something else that's outside of your responsibilities. If anything else, it's actually it's really promoted to help people like, hey, if you want to learn, start doing the job, and that's how you get you earn your promotions and kind of move up in your career. But the beautiful thing that there isn't this ladder. I think there's one way to sort of describe it. It's like it's a little bit of a rock climb. You get to choose your own path.
Hmm.
And so there isn't this sort of like, hey, I need to get to that next level or that level, project level 2 engineer or 3 engineer. It's like, hey, I can actually go in any direction, whichever might be my passion. Do I want to specialize in pre-construction or planning and scheduling, or go do something in self-perform or prefab or VDC for that matter, or technology? There's just a lot of options, I think, for folks, and it's really encouraged also to go and explore and gain that sort of experience in various different areas. And certainly, if you want the more traditional career path, you can take it. There's nothing against that. I think it's just the bigger thing that I see, especially from reflecting on my career. It's just a lot of great people and good mentorships, and it's really encouraging to let people see what they're capable of and let them take on more responsibilities if they're willing to do it, and let them learn and fail, and then guide them and mentor them along the way, and that way they become sort of ingrained as part of the DNA, and you sort of build your next generation of peers and coach them up as well. So I think it sort of helps sort of just continue to nurture that culture of creativity and taking care of people, and just having, it's not about, a lot of times what we say, it's not about who's right, but it's about what's right. And I think that kind of mentality helps us sort of solve problems a lot quicker. I think that a typical construction company where it might need to go through 4 or 5 different levels of decisions. before something gets done.
Yeah, I mean,
Can I
go ahead,
submit my
Lars.
application online?
Absolutely. We're
I
I
mean,
always
mean,
looking.
is
Now,
that not just the best? We need to
yeah,
like write this out, send it
yeah.
over, because that's like a PR release. Like,
that was just at a DPR. Like we, it's like a marketing episode for like why to
Right.
that was
join
it.
DPR. It was amazing.
Now,
But
there is that double-edged sword too, is if you're coming in and looking for a title and you think that title is going to give you some level of authority, well, you're in for a rude awakening.
it's fast. It is. I loved everything you said. It is interesting being an entrepreneur myself, and DPR clearly has this entrepreneurial culture, spirit, but also like framework in the industry, right? Like, wait a minute, you don't have titles? Like, hold on. Who's responsible? Who's accountable? Something I talked to Stephen earlier about,
Hmm.
But it's nothing. I didn't hear you say anything. It's like, no, no, no. Learn, plug in. You're a rock climber, right?
Yeah.
Choose
Yeah.
your own
Find your
path.
path. Exactly.
Follow your
But I think to
passion.
your last point, I think you quickly can decipher within that culture who is going to fit or not fit, right, in that kind of entrepreneurial capacity. But it is, and I would imagine, is it separated between kind of corporate services and operations? Like at a project level, you're still understanding who the superintendent for the PM is, or how does that work out?
Yeah. No, I mean, so there's still obviously projects are still run in a way that, are probably a little bit more typical, but I think there is that sort of still same level of flexibility there that there isn't like a pecking order per se, but, depending on the size of the project, the size of the team, you got a lot of people that can wear a lot of different hats, right? Obviously, some of these larger projects requires a little bit more structure and organization. I mean, it's not all willy-nilly, make it up as we go. I mean, there's somebody who's specifically on the GCs and the role chart to the owner. But I think the biggest thing is it's not so much about the title less. It's about how to work the matrix. Look, at the end of the day, I think this industry's relationship based. I mean, I was thinking back, Stephen, back when we were working together on some of the Star Wars stuff. I mean, it's a partnership if you want to get anything done, right? So you're working together, and it sort of allows to take maybe some of the egos out of the room and let people
Correct.
really form those relationships to
Yes.
say, hey, we're working on this together. We're here as a team. Let's treat each other with respect. And just because you have a higher title than somebody else doesn't mean that you need to somehow treat somebody different.
To me, and I love hearing you say this, it's a results oriented,
Yeah.
performance based organization, which, I heard, bureaucracy earlier and 4 layers of approval. A lot of C players hide in organizations like that, right? But if it's
Yeah.
titleless, sit at the table, let's solve a problem, pretty soon those A players rise and the rest sort of just like, I don't belong here, right? This
Yeah.
isn't my
Yeah.
place. I'm being
Yeah.
called to the table regularly.
Yeah.
Fascinating,
Yeah.
fascinating how they backed into this.
Yeah. But to be fair, it's got its own challenges, right? It's not all roses, right?
It's
I mean, we're a
people.
12,000 person organization now. I mean, it's a little bit chaotic. So there is certainly
Do you ever
some,
bump
I
into
think.
someone with like the same role and responsibility? You're like, oh shoot, it's like the Spider-Man meme.
They're like, what? You got hired? What? You just got to pick your own title? What just happened?
Yeah.
Right? So yeah, certainly there's some room for like optimization. We have departments and there's a lot of leaders at DPR, let's put it that way. But I think we're starting to get to a state now where trying to create some clarity around that, mainly I think for the younger generation, that they feel sometimes a little bit lost in that sort of a matrix. It can be difficult. There used to be an ongoing joke. It takes you about a year to figure out DPR and who you need to go talk to get information, which obviously is not the intent, right? So there's some structure needed around just communications and response to like who's really in charge? Because if everybody's in charge, nobody's in charge, right?
Right.
But I think it's a healthy balance of, hey, let's continue to maintain the great things about our culture, and then also let's create some clarity around, for people around kind of, hey, what is their promotional path look like if they're wanting to go in one career or another? Like, what are the steps to get there if I want to go in this direction or that direction? So that at least there's transparency around what competencies are needed and required in order for you to perform that job. And I think those are all healthy conversations that are in place today.
Yeah. So maybe, from the innovation and tech standpoint, I've been in that kind of seat and
Hmm.
often it's attempting to align kind of organizational initiatives around maybe different tech opportunities or different process opportunities, but it's a lot of attempting to get buy-in from a lot of different stakeholders. And I imagine there's
Hmm.
still that element, but how does how does the title-free maybe foundation set up a different kind of culture or conversation around innovation within DPR?
Yeah, I think there's a couple different ways to look at this. I'm thinking along the line, just putting my project hat on, kind of going back to that space where, you don't have an eternity to make decisions, right? So everything is a lot of it's like, hey, I got a problem, I'm going to solve it. Let's move on and get anybody and everybody who's on board, at least the key stakeholders, and kind of make that decision and run with it. And then, we'll come back and revisit it later. If it didn't work, let's try something else type of thing. In a corporate environment, you unfortunately maybe don't have that luxury because potentially you're going to be creating a lot of disruption and noise and change for people. So you got to be a little bit conscious and strategic about what you implement and when you implement, how you message it, right? So but I think I think the beauty with it is that Stephen, there are key work groups within DPR that are obviously in charge of their own verticals, and the kind of the recent role that I've been playing in the integrated work group is around just integration of project planning and execution technologies. So not just vertical integration, but horizontal integration of people, process, and technologies so that, it's looking at it more from a project lifecycle perspective instead of just what do I need to do in my own little bubble and silo. And so there's a lot of process alignment there, and there's a level of complexity with a lot of stakeholders that requires, I think, just early communication. And that's where the really I think the ability to bring in people from all sorts of different roles and backgrounds gives it sort of this incredible diversity of thought that you might not have if you're just sitting in some ivory tower and trying to make decisions for everybody else on how they should run their projects. So I think it allows us to pause and say, okay, let's really understand what problem we're trying to solve here, and let's bring in some key stakeholders. Let's understand what, because there's a lot of great things happening across our different projects today that some of them I'm not even privy to because it's like this sort of living lab of innovation. Now, there are, I think, the realization too that, look, if you're constantly innovating, you're not creating any consistency. So we're trying to like figure out what's the right balance between, hey, let's take some of these great things that we are doing well and let's make them repeatable and figure out how to really package that up in a framework that can be communicated and we can share some guidelines on how to execute that consistently, or at least the expectations for, hey, this is the recipe and how you should execute this work if this is what you want as a desired outcome. That just requires a lot more early process alignment. It's a slower pace. It requires getting people on board or just they won't do it. So that's another thing at DPR. It's like, hey, like if there is, we have to throw these funny terms like recommendatory. There are no conditions of, or there are some conditions of employment, obviously, but like there's a lot of freedom within the framework at DPR to question something if it's not helpful or it's not a subtraction or it's a lot more complexity to go and create that or they don't agree with the outcome. So you try to go through and vet those workflows quickly and as quickly as possible with the right people. You bring in the stakeholders, you go out and pilot, do different proof of concepts, and then you really go work on implementing and rolling that out as a company strategy and make sure that the communication is in alignment with what we're trying to achieve.
I love hearing that. I've been around so many construction companies where you're explained the process, or hey, this is the fill in the blank company name way, right?
Hmm.
And then you ask why,
Yeah.
because
Right.
immediately you're like, well, wait a minute. I think step 16 through 38 I can get rid of. Like we can eliminate that right now and jump to
Yeah.
42. And you want to know what their answer is? I don't know. It's just the way it's been done.
Right.
That's it.
Yeah.
And I love the living lab of innovation. Yes, every project is its own little perfect laboratory environment on like how can we kick butt here. It's fast,
Yeah.
Yeah.
but I think that's where clearly the founders of DPR had a bad experience. They probably got squashed. Their ideas, right? Their how they woke up and wanted to chase or kill something every morning was squashed. And they're like, we can do this. We can make this better. And that has transitioned to what it's a top 10 E&R company right in the
Yeah,
country. It's
yeah.
and it's that simple when leadership can inspire, and then next thing you know, you just let those people that come in that feel the same, and
Yeah.
look what can occur. So cool.
Yeah. No, there's the sort of, I think the beautiful thing is there isn't this sort of resistance to change. Now there is resistance for change for just sake of change, but if there's something that somebody wants to go and explore and implement and do better, I do think that there's a really good, healthy sort of
Yeah.
bottom up mentality at DPR to innovation, which I think helps us fuel. And to some extent, sometimes it can be challenging because it's like, just take any imaginable application out there. I'm sure we've tried it,
Yeah.
right? So there's a healthy level of trying things out and then also figuring out, hey, this is just we've tried it, this is proven, let's go and implement this broader. But I think that the fact that there is that flexibility and the opportunity to innovate is actually really, really positive. That we
And what
want to
I've
protect
seen
that.
is, and it's interesting to hear. So, recruiting that next generation, but allowing them to throw ideas out at the wall, right? Yeah, let's
Yeah.
go try it, right? Yes, plug into that. That to me, not only can that really excite that next generation when you are curious to listen to them, right?
Yeah.
Take on their ideas, but like, listen, that's the generation that is doing like 27 things on their phone all at the same time, and they've somehow posted 13 things before lunch, and you're like, I only got the,
Yeah.
couple emails and a hot cup of coffee. I don't know how
Yeah.
you're doing that. That's
Well,
insane.
yeah. They don't want to work 80 hours a week. So
Yeah.
Right.
they're going to figure out a faster, better way to do it,
Well,
right?
wait a minute, but you can get it all done.
Yeah.
How can I learn from you? Right? Like let's have that conversation. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and the flip side of that is how do you build some parameters that allows people to have the freedom to share, right? And
Mhm.
and yet also kind of direct it into some organizational initiatives that make sense. I mean, if I think back to my days as a PM, I had a lot of bad ideas. And fortunately, I had I had a mentor, shout out to Jeff Betts, who was able was willing to listen and be like, you don't
Yeah.
really understand the whole world. You see a very small picture and let me show you the world. And so
Yeah.
like how do you in your position make everyone feel heard, but also point back to like, yeah, we got to get these three things done or DPR doesn't move the ball forward.
Yeah. I mean, I think today that they're probably tired of hearing me say this, but it's like, hey, if you're going to don't bring in just another point solution, right?
Yeah.
Well, especially when it comes to like that kind of technology is like bring in something that's going to eliminate two or three other solutions. Find something that is more comprehensive, more integrated, that doesn't require us to just have another place to administer information, another data bottleneck potentially, or another application some poor
I
superintendent
love.
has to log into,
Yeah.
right? So trying to I think people are slowly but surely starting to recognize that, hey, that's probably a good filter to have. That's not to say that if we have an application that is just a dud and we need to replace it with something else that's got similar complementary features and functionality, like sure, let's go try it out and run a couple trials and compare the different solutions that are out there and make a decision. But ideally, we want to try to simplify our tech stack. I think there's a lot of technology fatigue right now. A lot
Man.
of tech debt, I think, is another term that we've
Mm-hmm.
been using. Is there's just, you know, it's hard to figure out. There isn't this one platform out there that does it all. It does it real well, which is why our industry is littered with a lot of these great point solutions because they were purpose built to address one of the 150 or so processes we have to manage on a project, right? So, Steve, you probably, whether it's logistics or safety, you name it, quality. I mean, there's an app for everything, and nobody's really figured out that, hey, building an app for everything isn't really at some point, it's not actually helping. It's creating a lot of noise.
Well said. It's a challenge because I think so many tech companies were born out of a conversation over Thanksgiving dinner. Their uncle owned a construction company and he was complaining he didn't get this or this isn't broken and da da
Yeah,
da. And hey, next week I got an app for that. Hey,
yeah,
sounds good. Just validated my product. My uncle likes it. Now I'm going to go take it to market. And before you know it, again, you've got 160 siloed solutions where it's like,
yeah,
wait a minute. not only, different size companies, different size projects, different types of projects, different owner types, different contractual
Yeah,
relationships there. And then you get into the complexities of residential, industrial, healthcare, K
exactly.
through 12, like, hold on, not this, just isn't this construction single bucket. Like
Yeah,
there's some complex stuff here going on.
for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, business idea. If we had like a private equity company, we raise a fund, we pick a workflow specifically for a project type, and you purchase all the point solutions within that workflow and just make them all work together well, and then come out with a new brand, right? It's that simple.
Hanu's
Yeah,
smiling. He's thought about it. Look at him. Look at him.
He's taking notes. He's he's
He's
good.
actually writing
He's
something
good.
down.
I know.
He's, but yeah, I mean, I think that is a problem. I think so we've talked a bit about like DPR in theory was kind of a 2.0 of the original kind of GC
Very much so.
template,
Yep.
right?
Hmm.
And kind of how it evolves and how it create kind of an evolved culture for innovation. When we look at uh maybe what is going to be the next iteration, we'll maybe hone in on just GCs for a second. But like what is as that maybe GC playbook gets rewritten again with technologies available, with the movement in AI guess two questions. One, how is DPR kind of preparing for that shift? But then two, and maybe more interestingly, like if you were going to start a GC tomorrow, Hany, what would that look like? And it's a big question. Tackle that any way you think is appropriate.
Yeah, I mean, there's probably a couple of different ways, couple of different themes, I guess I would tackle that. I mean, starting with some of the, I think, some of the fundamentals is, there's a lot of GCs out there that are pure CMs and sort of push paper, right?
Mhm.
Manage risk. I think more and more general contractors are starting to realize is that there's a lot of risk that we inherently own regardless. So the more we get involved earlier on and we become either design builders or really early design assist consultants or just take on more of that responsibility earlier to be like a trusted partner and maybe helping like coordinate the actual design and be contributing to that sort of design constructability process earlier the better. I think however we could position ourselves there, whether it's honestly maybe even becoming this more vertically integrated where we actually bring in more in-house design in to take ownership of some of the not the form and function, the beautiful things that the architects come up with, but really the more technical aspects of how um, the building gets built.
How you're going to build it?
Like the delegated design that nobody wants to deal with, doors raising hardware or it's a lot of those details, right? But I mean, we do a lot of concrete, we do a lot of drywall. Why can we be doing more, getting involved earlier in self-performing more scopes to not only control the critical path, but also control the risk?
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of opportunities there for some GCs to either partner strategically with some key trade partners or even bring some of those in and some design services in-house, not to compete with our design partners, but to provide services that they are not getting paid to do.
Yeah.
And so inherently what we're receiving is less and less complete documentation. And guess what? We don't have any more time and really to fix and coordinate the design than we had historically. So something's got to shift there. I think we're also making a lot of strategic investments in prefabrication. We've got a lot of shortages in skilled labor, so inherently we continue to invest in those areas that make sense, where it makes sense to build off-site and obviously leverage the capabilities of increased quality, but then also that production mindset and bring some of that under like a controlled environment rather than trying to do it on a job site where most of the time there's a lot of things that are out of your control. And then, I think there's the technology component here too. I do think that there's, we're making a lot of strategic investments as a company in making sense of our data, but
Yeah.
then also really preparing ourselves for this sort of AI revolution that's on our kind of at our fingertips here. I think a lot of it has to do with just figuring out clever ways to make us more productive. I don't think there's going to be some, Skynet that's going to take over our jobs anymore anytime soon, but there are more and more quote unquote small language models that are being developed specifically purpose built for construction that I think will hopefully help us optimize and just make decisions faster.
What data, Hanu, what data are you specifically thinking? Like if you were a small company, you get blasted with AI in construction constantly,
Mhm.
but yet you're sort of like a mess maybe in your company just structurally. But what's one thing, listeners could start like really focusing on from like a data, making sense of the data, right? Like what data are you or is DPR focusing on, or do you see other companies focusing on that has an ROI that sort of can be measured, that there's something there. Maybe we haven't gotten it yet, but if I clean this up in the next 6 to 12 months, I'm going to be able to harness something out of it. There's going to be some intelligence here. I'll be able to make better decisions. Just something
Yeah.
small to think.
Yeah. I think the two the most practical ones maybe, or the most like the biggest ROI for, I think it's with our estimating data.
Mm-hmm.
Just being able to get better benchmark information around cost per square foot, our core markets. I mean, we've got, hundreds of estimates across the different regions, different owners, and the more we get better at organizing and structuring that information so that we can
Mm-hmm.
benchmark and cost model,
Mm-hmm.
but do some projections and escalation studies on what things might cost, and be able to present that to our clients to give them at least a little bit of a target of what their project typically should cost or would cost, so that we're maybe a better aligned early on what a project actually will cost, so that there's a history there to show, hey, there were five similar type projects on this many hospital beds that were built in this California, Southern California in the last 10 years. And by the way, here's how much they cost on
Yep.
average.
Yep.
So that's certainly one. I think another one is along, I think also schedule data. If we
Yeah.
start get better at managing schedules and getting historical production rates and production data, we can start looking at analytics around, hey, roughly how long should something take? The challenge there and tends to be is this, that there's so much, even with the cost data, it's like just because we submitted something at GMP didn't mean that there were in a lot of bunch of changes later on. So there's a little bit of a 80-20 rule there. We got to go through and decipher that last 20% and like
You do. Yeah. Wow.
why were those escalations there? What cost those things? And so we can get down to the specifics around scope, or like where were those impacts? And that really applies to, I think, schedule as well. And yeah, I mean, once we know what it should cost, then we have a good idea of how to structure this information and just create a good data governance and vocabulary. I think it opens up an incredible amount of opportunities for AI to be able to start doing more predictive analytics, I think, which is where we're all kind of trying to get to as well. We got a lot of lagging indicators, but not a lot of great data points that allow us to decipher, hey, how are we trending in one particular area?
It is. I love, there's nothing like, conceptual estimating, bid day, like, okay, what are all the numbers? How many steel numbers? How many concrete, high, low, like what, okay, why is there such a spread? What's going on? Having
Yeah.
that information at your fingertips, transformational. I will say though, it is fascinating the past 5 years of cost data from the market, which I remembered, I think it was early 2000s, like what, lumber, like jumped up 70% or something insane, right? And then COVID happened. So next thing
Yeah.
you know, everything electrical and, it was just totally out of whack. Now you got
Yeah.
tariffs. So it's almost like, how do you, it's like you got a bracket like this past 5 years and you're like, okay, really interesting period. Okay,
Yeah.
moving forward, because there's been a lot of noise. There's a lot of noise.
Uh, I mean, I think some of that stuff you just got to factor in their percentages that
Yeah.
are,
Yeah.
I think percentages that are risk, and whether they're here to stay or not is to be determined. I think we're
Yeah.
seeing, hey, look, maybe there could be some impacts, but like what we're seeing, we've done a lot of studies on even those tariffs. It's like, look, what part of that equipment is coming from China or from Mexico, so that cost escalation, it might not be applicable to that entire piece of equipment. It's portions of it. So you just got to figure out how to play the game and see if maybe some of that stuff will get settled and hopefully negotiated, and maybe some of that production will come back to the States. Who knows? I mean, we'll see what how this all play out, but hopefully we're not seeing huge cost escalations yet, but it's certainly creating a lot of headache,
So
a
what's
lot of
interesting.
uncertainty.
Yeah, 100%. And again, going back to the living lab of innovation, yes, there's a lot of interesting things that occur on a project site, many of which you can't control. But you
Yeah,
did talk about prefab, right? And
yeah.
what type of project or components is, DPR or are your teams focusing on from a prefab standpoint? Because if you take what's going on, say, with tariffs right now and what components, you can control that a lot better in your own prefab environment rather
Mhm.
than trying to dissect switchgear and, the thousand, nuts and bolts and pieces that go into that. So what, from a prefab standpoint, are you guys focusing on? Because I know that translates better to more information around cost and better able to control that.
Yeah, I mean, some of it's, I think what you're alluding to, a little bit of a supply chain problem, and are you able to get those and get the materials to
And
the
workers.
facility and workers, yeah, to the site in a sufficient amount of time. I think we're seeing, I mean, the thing, prefab isn't like there's no easy magic button for it. There's got to be some repetition. There's got to be the right job where it makes sense, where you can create some consistency and repeatability. So we've found certainly like things like our Sure Pods facility, where full bathroom pods are those are becoming extremely actually a quite integrated set of systems that
Yeah,
are built that would be a lot of trade coordination on a job site,
yeah,
a lot of different handoffs that just being able to control that in a facility environment is the tremendous value proposition to, I think, clients as well as for DPRs and in the schedule aspect. And so we see that to be a really good area of innovation and continued innovation, and being able to get some of the OSHPOD certifications for that now allows us to also provide that product over to California, which is I think is going to be a huge value add for that market. And then obviously we do also look at and do panels, a lot of
yeah.
exterior panels, things that are pretty straightforward and repeatable that for a lot of these data centers that get built that are pretty consistent in size. And there's, these projects that tend to be very large now and they're in remote locations. So just it makes sense for prefab to be part of that sort of strategy to get the building components out there quicker and faster. But we have an entire prefab team that's continued exploring different components and like a catalog of prefab elements that make sense. The days of just doing like overhead MEP racks and or in wall hospital medcast assemblies is kind of secondary, but there continues to be a more and more of that, and hopefully our industry continues to sort of get creative on how to do that. I mean, we are doing electrical rooms now too. That's another thing that we're doing is
Mm.
putting in on a skids and bringing those into data centers. So there's a lot of room for a lot of opportunity there. I think just a matter of can we shift our mindset to make decisions earlier in the design phase in order to accommodate for that and really make sure that those partners are in their early part of that decision making process so that we can accommodate for that and don't have to try to deal with it later, because that's a problem if you got to go fix something later. If it didn't if it shows up to the job site, you got 100 of these pieces and they're all 100 of them, you got a mistake somewhere with it, that's
Yeah,
also a big problem.
that's a
It hurts.
problem. Yeah.
So how do we were both at a conference where where a tool on your side had a
Yeah.
great presentation on kind of the future of design and construction, came out with kind of predictions. And one of the slides that stuck out to me was, in the future we will model what we build and build what we model. As simple as that, right? And maybe, putting your VDC hat specifically on for a second, it's such a simple concept. And I think even going back to your point about if we rewind maybe 10, 15 years,
Mhm.
BIM was presented as kind of this ultimate solution that brings all these different technologies together, brings a collaborative environment together where we can pre-plan digitally. before we go out in the field. And I think that's happening in pockets, but not maybe as broadly as we maybe anticipated. Can you pinpoint, is there one thing we can do as an industry to kind of realize the BIM dream that was presented to us? Or what's the constraint?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of constraints. I do think that one of the challenges that we have is, and this is not a jab at the design industry by any means, but like the sort of completeness or the quality of the model information that we inherently receive during the design phase isn't adequate for construction, right? So that in to their credit, look, they're producing something that they're contractually obligated and required to produce, and ultimately they're contractually held to what's on the drawings. So the model never became this sort of contractual deliverable, which I think sort of diminishes its value to some extent, at least during the design phase. Where I've still seen a lot of value is during the construction phase with trade partners that are building a model in order to fabricate from it. It's got to be right. It's got to be accurate. So the steel fabricators and steel detailers, they're modeling things in
Yeah.
Tekla that is 100% accurate. You've got the capability to model reinforcement in solutions like Tekla and others, and so it's possible. We're modeling framing as DPR self-perform general contractor, getting the more and more framing of a modeling of also like concrete and reinforcement, right? MEP mechanical certainly has been modeling like to a high level of detail for quite some time. I think we're still seeing electrical also getting there, but they're obviously not modeling everything just because it's a conduit size conversation that keeps coming up in all of our different contract languages that they're just like, where's the value add? But I promise you, I mean, they don't build airplanes, they don't build cars without modeling every single part of that vehicle, right? Because it goes into a factory and it gets built and automated. So maybe that's the missing link still
That's
is how
that.
we consume information, right?
Well, bold belief here. Everything is a one-off custom solution in construction, right? And but I don't believe it has to be. Again, bold belief. It goes back to your prefab. It goes back to a catalog,
Yeah,
right? It's like, do you need a small, medium, or large? Of
yeah,
pick your bathrooms, pick your this, pick your that, and standardize some of this because why does everything have to be custom? Again, I used to get plenty of R&D credits, right? Why? Because no one had ever built this bathroom in this configuration ever before, and it was totally a one-off, design and build situation.
yeah,
And so, to your point, here we are. I love what you said. Like no airplane, no ship, is ever built without modeling.
right.
100%, because none of it would ever fit together. Maybe it's actually a miracle that anything that we build fits together without modeling, right? Like think about going into an existing hospital and like how do we make all these pieces work together? Testament to the workers, but I agree. I think there is a missing piece there that I'd love to see construction adopt
Yeah,
more from that modeling and take more value out of it.
But I would argue that standardization is not the only path forward, right? And obviously, this is putting my
Bold
day
belief. Here we
my
go, Steve.
my work hat on a little bit from Via Technic, but I think we work with plenty of progressive GCs and GCs across the spectrum of maybe maturity that at times are building in the model what they're going to build in the field. And there's just, if I were to identify what the difference is, there's a difference in respect of the digital. For the teams that respect the digital environment like they respect the physical environment, there is a whole different level of outcome at a field level, right? If you discount the digital, then like Hanu, you said, you're going to start with a design intent model that has flaws in the background and creates flaws through the coordination process and leads to gaps in the field execution process. So yeah, I think how do you it's a cultural shift to some degree, right? Putting that priority back on the digital environment.
yeah. And I mean, I've seen it done right. We've all been on probably
Yeah.
projects where it's like, wow, that was executed so well. And what's probably the most frustrating is like, okay, what's preventing us from doing that over again? And it comes down to the owner. Is the owner really willing to trust the process? Because it still baffles me today how reluctant we are around soft costs, so to speak, pre-construction cost people that are coming in there to work on helping coordinate the design. But as soon as we go into construction, the hard costs, it's like the money faucet opens up and nobody really says, whatever, just get it built as soon as that sort of mobilization occurs. Whereas if you shifted some of that design contingency dollars and brought it on earlier and you onboarded certain key trades and you were able to do that in a way that maybe you brought them on board for just pre-construction services and you paid them for that, for them to be contributing to that model or that design delivery process and get their components in there, we can virtually work through the different kinks and there was sufficient amount of time in there to do that. And maybe we had a good process that allows us to do that in a way that's sequentially organized, that supports construction. And like if everything just kind of fell into place where it could come in and work through those details and release things for fabrication or to the field to go build it, where we've done it. We've brought on board
Yeah.
on a hospital project in Southern California, onboarded 20 trade partners before even construction started, and everything was modeled and they accelerated that schedule twice
Right.
because everything was going and so quickly and smoothly. So
Yeah.
there's a story there that it works when
Yep.
properly implemented. You have the right leadership and the right buy-in, but a lot of times I think we're handcuffed by a lot of the contracts that we sign up for.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fair. Well, hey, I want to be respectful of your time, Hanu. Maybe one last question from me, and then I'll hand over to Lars. But if you were to kind of be able to go back in time and maybe have a short conversation with the young version of yourself coming from Finland, heading into the industry, what would you advise young Hanu?
Should have gone to work for DPR right away.
Yes.
There you go.
The grass is not greener on the other side. Don't get me wrong.
You
When
tried
they
it, right? You
yeah,
tried
no, the pixie dust was certainly it was a big
it sprinkled.
you know, it certainly got me excited to go work on there. And honestly, like from an experience perspective, I'm not saying like honestly like having that owner perspective. And I think it's all about whether you're advancing your career or not just jumping to go make a lateral move. But
Yeah.
if you're challenging yourself, I think those are always good things. But I think it's just finding a place that you enjoy being in. And if you enjoy waking up in the morning and doing what you're doing, and stick with it. There's something to be said about working with people that you like to work with.
Yeah, that's wisdom right there. Lars?
Well said. You see a lot of different things. We've talked about AI. We talked about estimating, scheduling, and some value that can be gained there. I
Yeah.
totally agree with all that. One question I like asking is, what's a piece of tech that you really see making an impact here that you're really touching, you're really feeling, and you're like, no, this could be really good for the teams, or whether it's office or field. Just what's the thing that top of your mind right now that you're like, this has me excited. This is pretty cool. Listeners should just go check this thing out.
Yeah. I think some of it, maybe some things that I think are real today. There's a lot of hype around AI,
Yeah.
but some of the I think some of the applications that we're seeing that work really well today are things like voice recognition, text recognition, and image recognition. I always joke around. You guys remember that Silicon Valley show that was on HBO, right? I
Yeah.
mean, they were talking about image recognition like 10, 20 years ago.
20 years ago.
Right. And so it's a hot dog or not hot dog, right? But like it actually can the different applications that are out there and how quickly they're able to recognize information from 360 photos or LiDAR scans for that matter. It's so much more advanced and it's so much I think faster, and there's actually a lot of open AI different algorithms available, the code that's available out there that I think a lot of these different companies are able to use and leverage, and some of them who are on the early cusp of it, they've built their own engines. But what I think it's allowing us to do is get some real insights into what's happening on projects at a much
Yeah.
quicker, faster time. So I think what excites me is probably actually being able to get real progress information. Maybe we can get it autonomously at some
Yeah.
point, but like actually understand how much work got put in place and not having to walk around there and with marks on PDF anymore. But it's like, hey, what if we could really start measuring our progress against our plan and understand how our plan needs to be adjusted or managed in order for us to meet that schedule? Or understand what productivity gain, what we need to improve in order for us to meet that. Just having those insights at your fingertips is what really I think, at least that has me currently excited about what's in store for the future.
I want to live in that world. I mean, if you think about how many simultaneous trades are performing on site, right, and sort of
Yeah.
coordinating that not off of a clipboard, but like real time data,
Hmm.
and having it be fact based, not emotions, not well, this
Right.
is how I interpret it. Like
Hmm.
that is a dynamic world, and this industry will overnight change, right? That
Agreed.
engagement, love it.
Yeah, automated plan percent complete. Man, if you would have said like 10 years ago, we'd still be talking about this. It's it's like we just want to know what happened.
I know.
uh,
I know,
but
man.
Hannu, this has been fun.
Yeah.
Anywhere you want people to kind of direct people if they want to connect with you? I don't know, LinkedIn, TikTok. Do you do dances? What's your
Yeah, yeah.
Sauna.
Not a weekend influencer, but yeah, no side hustles like that. But for certainly, if you want to go on LinkedIn, you can find me there, Hannu Lindbergh and at DPR. So feel free to reach out. I'm happy to connect and message and chat, and hopefully meet some of the folks at some of these industry events as well. So a lot going
Fantastic.
on, and little plug for building transformations. There's an event coming up in Toronto. If people can make it up there. There'll be a lot of similar-minded folks up there talking about how we can change some of the challenges in our industry.
Well,
We can put a
and
link
I'll,
in the podcast on that one.
we'll do that, and I'll second it by saying I attended one a few weeks
Yes, you
ago
did.
in Austin,
Yeah,
Texas, and it was a
yeah,
fantastic event. And what
yeah,
I liked about it was the right size. Like so often you go to conferences, they're either too small, like no one's there, or it's too big, right? And this
yeah,
was kind of the right size porridge bowl, for example.
yeah.
So
Quality,
thanks for joining us,
quality
man.
over quantity, right?
Yeah, I like
Yeah.
it.
All right, man.
All right,
Thank you. Appreciate it,
thank
guys.
you.